Before I begin, remember to have a statement of reason out in front of you. We will have the statement of reason.
And I've got your statement that came originally into the inspectorate. Is there nothing else to add to that?
Yeah, I've got some things I will be adding to it. I'll hand it in paper version afterwards, but people may want to have a statement of reason from council in front of them.
I think so, everybody can just tell me which core documents they are.
My name is Langleben. I'm a councillor for West Hendon Ward in Barnet. I was elected in May 2014, and I am a member of the West Hendon Regeneration Partnership Board, although I'm not giving evidence as a member. This is my own personal views. I believe that Father John Hawkins and Bruce Bates will address the points on behalf of the resident side of the partnership board. I would like to build on paragraphs 5, 6 and 7 of my statements that I submitted, specifically in reference to the affordable housing element of the scheme. Paragraph 3.14 of the Statement of Reason states, the current estate does not offer a mixed and balanced community, in brackets 76% affordable housing units, close brackets, has poorly designed public spaces and private spaces, no clear hierarchy of the streets, or desirable through routes, offers no sense of orientation within the estate, a lack of natural surveillance on public routes, no clear relationship between streets, buildings, open space and Welsh Harp, and has no clear connection with the Broadway and surrounding streets. This statement suggests that the current community living within the West Hendon estate is an unbalanced and non-mixed community. I would argue that it is most definitely a mixed community with around 100 languages being spoken. This statement states that the current makeup of the estate is 76% affordable units under the Mayor's definition. The Statement of Reason suggests that this percentage of affordable housing creates an unbalanced community. The redevelopment of the estate will flip this figure on its own head. 75% of the proposed units on the new estate are deemed to be unaffordable under the Mayor's own criteria. The proposers of the scheme do not offer any definition of what a mixed and balanced community should be, but one must assume that the 76% affordable provision on site now is not a mixed community. Then surely, turning on this figure on its own head to 75% unaffordable does not represent mixed and balanced. Paragraph 4.4 of the Statement of Reason states that the change in economic climate prompted a change in the scheme. I would strongly argue that there has once again been a change in economic climate, which indicates to me that the original scheme should be looked at once again. During almost every witness statement presented to the inquiry, the word viability has been raised. The proposers claim that viability prohibits the original scheme from proceeding. Unless the viability report is published.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, I do apologize, but I think you're reading something that I haven't got.
Well, I rather wondered that myself, in that you said you're adding to statements. I would take you adding to those paragraphs rather than reading the statement. Okay.
I can give you a copy.
Do you have copies of that? Okay.
It's just I thought the inspector had it and I didn't. If it was one, then I wouldn't have taken notes.
No, I'm matching paragraphs. In terms of how much is there better copy? Because it just might be easier to make notes immediately onto your copy of the original German.
23 pages.
Okay. It might be better to have it copied for now, I think, to be honest.
I can go grab a copy if you wish.
Otherwise, there is going to be an issue in terms of actually keeping up with what's being said. So I think it's just a couple of additional notes to go in with existing statement. Do you have spare copies?
I have one additional copy here.
Well, I think we probably need more than one. Could we just have an adjournment of 5 minutes and we'll see if we get it copied? Could you you arrange that scheme? So we're back here for 25 to now. It's by that point. It's already 25 to by that one. So we'll take it by the copies in front of me. We're back to 25 to just so you can get that copy. We'll wait for this all to come back. We can start back then. Mr. King, do you want to say anything about statement change?
No, that's fine. I don't know it's a problem. It'd just be nice to have it in advance. We've got to let it carry on.
Let me just apologise, I wasn't sure if I had it in before or after.
That's all right.
Yeah, I just hadn't anticipated quite such a change after what you said, but...
We don't know how much will change.
Exactly.
But anyway, do carry on.
If I can just say, I use my time to go through the statements of reason and try to provide my own evidence from that prior to reading the statement of reason thoroughly. I wasn't able to do that in my initial statement. I'll start again on page 3, paragraph 4. Okay. During almost every witness statement presented to this inquiry, the word viability has been raised. The proposers claim that viability prohibits the original scheme from proceeding. Unless the viability report is published and open to scrutiny by the inspector and made public, it is impossible for me to be sure of such claims. Paragraph 4.15 of the Statements of Reason gives opinion and conjecture of the current estate. I would argue this is purely a matter of taste. It should be clear to this inquiry that a large number of residents, if not the majority, as demonstrated by the protests, ballots and submissions, do not believe this to be accurate. This paragraph also states that the proposal will deliver an increase in the quantity of usable on-site amenity space and will, quote, significantly, unquote, improve the quality of open space provision. I would argue that whilst the proposal may deliver an increase in square foot of amenity space, it is a completely different type of open space to what is currently on site. It would be immensely difficult for children to play football on the space proposed when at present there is ample space for such sport activities. The point which states that it will significantly improve the quality of open space. This is also just opinion and conjecture. The only people able to deliver such a verdict are the residents. And I believe that Mr. Musgrove will expand on arguments on your Memorial Park in her statement. Paragraph 4.16 argues that there is poor linkage between the estate and the West Hendon recreation grounds. This is correct, because historically the sites have had very few linkages or similarities between them. The proposal wishes to move playing sports activities away from the estate onto the West Hendon recreation grounds. The recreation ground has had little investment over the years, and whilst I welcome any investment as part of the ward, I believe this is wrong that on-site recreation space currently on the estate is being removed. Some residents have also raised concerns about the distance between parts of the estate and the West Hendon recreation ground. The Section 106 agreement, Schedule G, states that improvements to the West Hendon playing fields or recreation grounds is priority number 3. The schedule does not state specifically what improvements will be provided to the recreation grounds. Paragraph 4.21 of the Statements of Reason once again goes on to state an opinion. The delivery of the scheme will result in a better mix of tenure. To restate my earlier point in paragraph 2 of this verbal statement, 75% non-affordable housing on the new development compared to 76% affordable at present does not necessarily represent a better mix. It is turning the current tenure mix on its own head. If 76% affordable is a bad mix, then surely 75% unaffordable is an equally bad mix. Paragraph 5.3 of the Statement of Reason states that the West Hendon estate has been identified as a failed housing estate. The reasons stated to justify this comment are that the estate has poor quality housing, physically isolated and creates social exclusion. To tackle the first assertion, the housing stock is of poor quality precisely because the council has failed to properly maintain its housing stock. The second assertion is that the estate is physically isolated is a matter of opinion. It is quite clear that residents currently living on the estate and in the surrounding area do not necessarily agree with this view. In regards to the third assertion that the estate creates social exclusion, I would strongly argue that this sense has been created by Barnet Council's housing allocations policy in regards to regeneration estates. a policy of only housing non-secure temporary tenants on any estate, many of whom have severe personal difficulties, and this creates social exclusion. These people have no idea where they may or may not be moved, have suffered stress because of the housing policy, and have felt socially excluded as many have been moved away from their own communities where they were previously housed. This policy of non-secure tenancies has been crafted purposely by the London Borough of Barnet to make the regeneration of its council stock more viable for developers. This was confirmed to me by a question I put to Mr. Shipway, the London Borough of Barnet, last week. In regards to paragraph 5.14 of the statement of reason, I do not necessarily oppose an increase in density, so long as the existing residents of the estate will be accommodated for. This is evidently not the case as stated in my written submission. I would, however, argue that the height of the buildings proposed is out of character with the surrounding area, and it would seem that the wish to build high is driven by higher property prices of the views of the Welsh Harbour, views which will not be available to the lucky existing residents who will be remaining on the new estate. Paragraph 5.14 of the statement of reason argues that the case is in line with London Plan Policy 3.9, mixed and balanced communities. As stated previously, I do not believe that the proposed social diversity adds any value to the area. It simply flips the current situation on its own head. Paragraph 5.16 states that the London Plan Policy 3.11 requires boroughs to maximise affordable housing provision. The case has not been made, but this has happened in the case of West Hendon. Access to the liability reports has been restricted, and therefore I cannot reasonably come to the conclusion that maximum reasonable affordable housing provision has been obtained by London Borough of Barnet and provided by the developers. Paragraph 5.17 states London Plan Policy 3.14, which says that local authorities should aim to resist the loss of housing, including affordable housing, unless it is replaced at existing or higher densities with equivalent floor space. It is absolutely clear this policy has been ignored in regards to the West Hendon scheme. The development, when constructed decades ago, had 680 social housing units. After the redevelopment of the estate, this number will be down to 250. This scheme is resulting in a total liberal loss of 430 social units, including now leasehold and freehold units. A conservative loss based on the number of social units at present is 199. This goes against London Plan Policy 3.14, as it represents a significant loss of social housing units. Paragraph 5.12 of the statement of reason and subsequent bullet points try to justify the loss of units by stating that there's no net loss of housing floor space. Floor space is pretty inconsequential to residents who will be made homeless. The idea that shared ownership, which accounts for half of the affordable housing provision, represents an opportunity for residents living on the current estate is nothing short of laughable. Shared ownership schemes are more aimed at people such as myself, people earning between £30,000 and approximately £60,000 a year, not people on the lowest incomes. It is an insult to the existing residents that this represents 50% of the affordable housing elements. In order to achieve shared ownership, you need to be able to put down the required deposit and obtain a mortgage.
Can I just stop you there? At the beginning of that paragraph, you said there was 5.12. I just want to check whether that was a typo I needed to change or just a...
Sorry, 5.18.
Yeah. Thank you.
Paragraph 5.18, bullet 2 of the statement of reason refers to the independent viability assessment, which has justified the 25% affordable housing elements. As stated earlier, until this viability assessment is open to scrutiny by an inspector and the public, it is unfair to be used as justification, and I would again refer you to my addendum documents requesting the release of the viability assessment. Paragraph 5.19 of the statement of reason addresses the proposer's opinion of the current balance of the community in West Hendon. In the case of this scheme, quote, redressing the imbalance, unquote, in reality means mass eviction of social renters. The balance is being tipped too far in the opposite direction. In paragraph 5.42 of the statement of reason, the council accurately states that it acted as a local planning authority when determining the scheme acceptable. This point I wish to make goes back to the statement by Andrew Dismal, when he expressed the view that the consultation and planning process was not fair. The London Borough of Barnet has a policy on the regeneration of its housing stock, and it is made clear by other developments that it is not particularly concerned about the provision of affordable housing. The point that Dismal was trying to make is that it is a politically weighted planning committee which is voting on a planning application which is the policy of the local authority. This creates a conflict of interest between the whip which councils are accountable to versus the quasi-judicial independence in planning. If it is policy of the council to regenerate West Hendon Estate, then the conflict of interest develops for administration councillors. It is the view of Andrew Dismal and myself and other members of the Labour Members Council that it is inappropriate for administration councillors to be subject to, who are subject to whipping requirements, to be able to vote on planning issues that are essentially policy of their own administration and subject to whipping arrangements. I have no reason to question the independence of committee members who voted on this. I just wish to point out that a conflict of interest does exist when determining the planning decisions connected to administration policy. Regarding paragraph 6.18 of the Statement of Reason, last week I asked about whether the capital receipt from the developers is ring-fenced in the housing revenue accounts. Whilst I'm not sure I've received an answer to this, I'm assuming that it will be as it's appertaining to HRA land. I do not believe the same situation exists in regards to the car parks at Perryfield Way. This is not HRA land, but General Council land. I would like to know what capital receipt was received from this land transfer, and whether the capital receipt is being ring-fenced for delivery of affordable housing within the HRA account. Paragraph 7.6 of the Statement of Reason states that the use of compulsory purchase orders should only be made where there is a compelling case in the public interest. I do not believe that Barnet Council has made such a compelling case, and I am unsure as to what test has been applied in regards to the overall public interest. I do not believe that it's in the public interest of the 197 non-secure households on the West Hendon Estate for the regeneration to go ahead without an explicit assurance of secure housing. Nor do I believe that the public interest has been demonstrated in the granting of a compulsory purchase order. Compulsory purchase orders should be granted as a last resort after negotiations with affected parties, namely leaseholders in the case of West Hendon. I do not believe the Council acted reasonably in this regard, as they only commenced negotiations for the acquisition of properties 24 hours prior to the issuing of CPO proceedings. Paragraph 7.9 of the Statement of Reason refers to Appendix A of the circular and states that factors which the Secretary of State will take account when deciding whether or not to grant consent for the compulsory purchase order. While I accept that the scheme may provide improvements to the economic well-being of the area, I do not accept that the scheme will provide an improved social and environmental well-being to the area. I have already stated the reason as to why I feel that the scheme will be detrimental to the social well-being of the area. In regards to the environmental well-being of the area, the Welsh Harp is a triple SI, and whilst the developer is taking steps to mitigate against any environmental problems which may arise due to the construction, it must be noted that any tampering of this area puts the environmental well-being of the area at risk. Nature is at its best when it's left alone. Regarding paragraph 8.1 of the Statement of Reason, I do not believe that the process has been transparent. Residents have been led up the garden path throughout this process. Pledges have been made, pledges have been broken, all under the guise of viability, a guise we are not even able to properly scrutinise. The case for changes to the original scheme has not been properly made to residents, and as a result there is a clear lack of trust between residents and the developers and the London Borough of Barnet. In regards to paragraph 8.4 of the statement, I wish to clarify that only half of the current residents will, and I quote, enjoy an improved quality of life from homes built to lifetime home standards, unquote. The rest of the residents are more likely to be transferred to another regeneration estate on similar, if not identical, non-secure tenancies, and will have to go through the whole process again when their estate is up for regeneration. Paragraph 8.5 of the Statement of Reason once again states opinion, and I quote, the redevelopment will create a more attractive, vibrant and sustainable neighbourhood through high design standards and improved mix of housing tenures and sizes, clear distinct improvements to the public realm and overall a more balanced and inclusive community, unquote. Paragraph 8.8 and subsequent bullet points of the Statement of Reason go on again to suggest opinion rather than any fact. The statement again uses the phrase, quote, improved tenure mix of private and affordable housing units. Improvements are being made to the pedestrian and cycle connections, but the local authority has an anti-cycling policy, which means that the inclusion of such provision is pretty pointless, as the local authority does not provide cycling provisions on their own maintained streets. Bullet 4 of paragraph 8.8 states that the scheme provides an increase in quality of on-site amenity space. Again, this is opinion as is the claim of improvements to open space as stated earlier in this submission. Paragraph 8.10 of the statement of reason sets out the process of negotiations with freeholders and leaseholders. As stated earlier, I do not believe the council has acted in a reasonable way in commencing negotiations 24 hours prior to CPO proceedings. Paragraph 9 and the section on human rights of the statement of reason seek to justify any breaches in human rights law by stating the overarching public interest. As stated in paragraph 9.5 of the statement of reason, the courts have recognised that a balance must be struck between competing interests. I do not believe the right balance has been struck in the case of this CPO. Without wishing to go into details of purchase offers, I'll leave that to Mr. Knowles. It is clear that current residents are getting a bad deal, and the conduct in which the CPO proceedings began are far from perfect. Residents who remain on the estate during the construction works are having their quality of life affected by the construction works, and it is clear that Article 1 of the first protocol is being contravened as residents are not having, and I quote, peaceful enjoyment of their possessions, unquote. The way in which non-secure tenants are being treated makes me deeply suspicious of any human rights arguments that this authority makes. I do not believe that the council have achieved a fair and proportionate balance between the interests of those whose convention rights will be affected and the community as a whole. I would further add that the use of the community in this context, in reality, is about council tax receipts for the council. Paragraph 10.2 of the statement of reason refers to the possession hearings and the notices to quit to non-secure tenants. Having advised some of these residents on these hearings, I'm very unhappy in the way in which the council has acted towards non-secure tenants, as we heard from one of the previous witnesses. These tenants do not know whether to attend the hearings, what their legal rights were, and felt intimidated by the local authority. Angelism when local councillors were able to obtain high-quality legal services for some residents who were eligible for legal aid, and those residents who did take their fight to court have obtained more appropriate housing. Those who did not attend these possession hearings have either been moved to another regeneration estate or been discharged by Barnet Council in regards to their housing duty. I'm increasingly of the view that this regeneration and the regeneration of other estates, along with the mass use of non-secure temporary tenancies, is a cheap rehash of some of the worst excesses of Dame Shirley Porter's policies in London Borough of Westminster in the 1980s. It is creating social displacement on a huge scale that will eventually result in a significant number of non-secure tenants being forced to leave London Borough of Barnet. The Built and Disabled Communities Programme, more commonly known as the Votes for Home scandal by Westminster Council, used very similar language about social well-being, better mixes of people. The policy on regeneration estates and this council's willingness to allow developers to get away with not replacing the social units they knock down seems to encourage a permanent change in social composition of this borough. The principle is the same, knocking down social units and designating the new units which replace them as units for private sale. Westminster Council expected that this programme would result in, I quote, a pattern of tenure which is more likely to translate into Conservative votes, unquote. I cannot see any better way to define my own expected outcome of this displacement of a settled community. It is essentially a gerrymander, and whilst I understand this is outside the inspector's remit and scope, I'm not able to avoid mentioning this. Going back to the statement of reason, paragraph 10.9 confirms the number of non-secure tenants are able to be rehoused. Once again, the majority are likely to be decanted to another regeneration estate, namely the Graham Park estate in Langleben. When that estate is regenerated in just a few years' time, with a similar loss of social housing to West Hendon, many of these residents will be forced out of the borough or out of London. Social displacement on a scale that this part of London has never seen. Paragraph 13.4 of the statement of reason states that alternative options have been considered for the regeneration of West Hendon. I'd very much like to know what these options were so they could be assessed independently. Once again, let's go back to the question of the release of the viability assessment. Paragraph 13.6 of the statement of reason describes the community and economic benefits of the regeneration. In the original proposals put to residents, the West Hendon Broadway was also due to be regenerated. This would have significantly improved the economic well-being of the entire area. The current proposals do not go nearly far enough on what was originally proposed, and I believe that Mr. Cllr has stated this in his evidence. I would also like to query who would be the freeholder of the community centre once constructed and what the pricing would be for residents. I do not believe this has been addressed thus far. Paragraph 13.9 of the Statement of Reason tries to address the concerns about consultation. It's impossible to escape the ballot of residents in 2002 on a very different scheme. Whilst the council and developers have stated that there's no statutory requirement for a reballot on the new scheme, one has to wonder why there was a need for a ballot on the first set of proposals. Why is a ballot okay on a different scheme but not required on this one? Quite simple really, as the council know that they will not like the result. There may be no legal obligation, but it will be the right thing to do. I also dispute the fact stated at the time of the ballot that there were no non-secure tenants on the site. And I believe that Father John Hawkins may explore this issue further in his statement to the inquiry. Paragraph 13.4 of the Statement of Reasons goes on to address the concerns around the breakup of a strong community. Once again, I do not believe that a public interest test has been reasonably applied to this concern. The non-secure tenants have no idea of what their future holds. The secure tenants are primarily being decanted to properties they were not promised, and not next to the neighbours where they've built relationships with over decades. The demographic makeup of the secure tenants is older than non-secure and often more vulnerable in terms of age concerns. The council has stated that the public interest outweighs the concerns of the community. I still do not know what public interest test can be applied to make this case. The paragraph goes on again to suggest that the scheme will provide an improved housing mix, conjecture and opinion that current residents profoundly disagree with. Paragraph 13.20 of the Statement of Reasons suggests that secure tenants will be able to remain council tenants. It goes on to suggest that tenants will be on identical similar terms. The terms must remain the same as current tenancies as promised on page 1 of the original pledge, including succession rights. Any change in rights to what the statement describes as similar rights are not acceptable, as the pledge stated very clearly that your rights will be protected. Paragraph 13.31 addresses the non-disclosure of the PDA. Considering that this proposal is concerning public land and a transfer of public assets, it is perfectly reasonable to request this document to ensure that it can be properly scrutinised. The public should be able to scrutinise the terms under which the council and developer will deliver a key flagship policy of this council. Now moving on to the Section 106 agreement. Page 4 of the agreement, titled Deeds of Agreements, Section E, refers to the transfer of land. I'm armed as to what the capital receipt received by the authority for this transfer of land was, and it would be good to know, especially as CDA 14, which is the document in the library, I believe, disclosed that the council had disposed of land to the developer at less than best consideration, less than best considered reasonably obtainable, below market value, much like the offers being made to leaseholders. Section 70 of the Section 106 agreement, which refers to the granting of planning permission, titled CPZ exclusion, states that residents will be excluded from obtaining CPZ permits outside the new estate in existing zones. As I have seen on other developments in the London Borough of Barnet, when new developments charge such extortionate amounts of money for a parking space, this will almost always result in residents trying to park in neighbouring streets outside of operation hours. Once the scheme is completed, I'm almost certain that this will result in an increase in cars in neighbouring streets and will require a significant increase in the hours of CPZ operation throughout the area, especially around Walmead Avenue and the Wilberforce Triangles, if even stretched up to Park Road, towards Sturgis Avenue, Dallas Road, Vicarage Road and Montague Road. The parking provision within the proposal is not realistic and does not respond to the necessity of a car in outer London. In paragraph 9 of Schedule B, Part 1 of the Section 106 agreement, it states that service charges for the affordable housing units should be fair and reasonable proportion of total housing costs payable by the occupants of the affordable housing units. I remain unclear that service charges are fair or reasonable, or close to what's being paid now, which is what's promised. In paragraph 9 of Schedule B, Part 2 of the Section 106 agreement, it it states that the developer shall provide an updated financial appraisal to reassess the affordable housing elements at various stages. Paragraph 9.2 of this section confirms that the determining surveyor who would judge whether an additional affordable housing contribution is required will be paid for by the developer, and the council are bound to the findings of this determining surveyor. In my view, this creates an unacceptable conflict of interest, which I object to. I may need to develop this correctly, but it would appear that paragraph 12.2b of Schedule B, Part 2 of the Section 106 agreement essentially caps the affordable housing levels across these developments at 25%. If correct, this would mean that if the determining surveyor found the developer could provide more affordable housing, this would have to be provided in cash for the development of further units outside of the regeneration area. But I would like some clarity on this point by the council and the partners. Schedule D, paragraph 6 to 12 of the Section 106 agreement refers to public transport, including bus and road contributions. It is reasonable to suggest that the primary form of transport for commuters living on the new estate will be the Hendon Thameslink station. I do not see any contributions towards a much needed upgrade of the Thameslink station. Hendon Station is one of just 3 stations north of the River Thames that is not receiving a platform upgrade to receive the new 12-car trains. As a result, once the Thameslink programme is complete and the new rolling stock is in operation, the station will be served by less trains per hour than at present. It's a missed opportunity that a platform upgrade was not part of the contributions being made by the developer. And finally, moving on to page 69 of the Section 106 agreement, it is disappointing that the roads are not being adopted by the council. If the council were to adopt the roads, it would mean that additional parking could be provided and that residents in neighbouring streets would be less affected by than what I anticipate will happen. Before I finish, I'd like to comment on the protection of residents. After the planning application, consideration was given towards mounting a legal challenge. Obtaining the necessary funding for such a challenge was near impossible, and sadly the same is applied to this inquiry. Whilst the London Borough of Barnet and the developer have the funds available to employ an experienced, very professional QC to help make their case, residents of the West Hendon estate largely relied upon unqualified lay members of their own community to fight their case, and myself and my councillor colleagues have tried to help wherever possible. My conclusion is that when considering the public interest, this scheme is too balanced in favour of the developer rather than local people, and ask the inspector not to grant the CPO in order for the council and the developer to pause and rethink the entire proposals and ensure that justice and proper consultation is provided to the residents of West Hendon estate.
I'll stay there a moment, Mr. King might have some questions for you.
No, I don't have any questions.
I was going to say, if you want to take an adjournment now, if you wanted a chance to look through it, you've said
No, I mean, to Councillor Langleben has raised most of these points during the course of the inquiry. There's nothing, or there's very little, I think, it's fair to say that's new. I mean, the problem with cross-examination, either you do the whole lot, or you don't, and you go through everything. I don't think it will help you very much, and I've decided that we'll deal with the point he makes in submissions. And insofar as there are 2 matters which I made a note of, I might not pick them all up, on which Councillor Langleben is asking for specific information, then we'll look at that and provide that. I don't want to provide new information in submissions, obviously, but we can deal with the matters that raised in submissions, and it's all very clear. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Probably a sensible time to have a short break now anyway, so we just have 10 minutes, so that's until 20 past. 11, I think.